The new update brought a bunch of changes to Invocator, new passives, new gear, new skill cores, new masteries, and more. A lot has changed. And in this video, I will explain what I changed in my Invocator build to deal more damage in dungeons and on world bosses. Disclaimer here, this is not a beginner guide. If you're completely new to Invocator, I would highly suggest you checking out my older Invocator guides, which I'll link you in the video description. In this video, we are focusing on the biggest changes from the latest update. Okay, let's start first here with the new passives. First of all, we have Elemental Awakening. Now, how this ability works is, if you, for example, use your fire abilities, you get those fire elemental stacks. And as soon as you reach your 5 fire elemental stacks, you will reduce all your ice cooldowns. And on top, get some species damage boost. So you see that in the bottom of the description, 5 fire elements equals ice skills remaining cooldown minus 16%. If we hit 2 ice abilities on our target, we will reduce all our lightning skills. And if we hit 7 lightning abilities, we will reduce all our fire skills. So as you reach those stacks, you will reduce those cooldowns. And on top, you will get some species damage for 4 seconds. With a bunch of buff duration, that is around 7 seconds. But once you gain the cooldown reduction and on top the species damage boost, it's locked for 10 seconds. And that's why this passive is really useless in PvE, because the uptime will be not high enough. And that even though this buff is always refreshing. So if you hit the 5 fire elements, you get those 72 species damage boost for 7 seconds. As soon as you hit the 7 lightning, it refreshes that value. But the problem is you will hit those always almost at the same time. So they always overlap. And the cooldown reduction is nice, but you will not notice that in PvE, especially because as an Invocator, a lot of our damage comes from our wand abilities, from our curses. But we are not reducing those cooldowns. We're only reducing ice, lightning, and fire skills. And that's why I would not play with this Elemental Awakening passive. It's kinda useless. Then the wand passive is called Curse Resonance. And this one is something special. So how this works is, if you have the passive equipped and you have curses on your enemy, so you have, for example, Decaying Touch or Touch of Despair on your enemy, then everyone in your group that is hitting that target has a chance to trigger your curse explosion. It only deals 30% of your dark explosion, but especially if you have a team that is doing a lot of hits, they will trigger that a crazy amount of times. And this curse explosion that they trigger functions the exact same way as yours. So it's dependent on your curses on the target. So your Touch of Despair, your Decaying Touch, and your Tavern Wand, and so on. So the more dots you have all the time on the target, the more damage you will do with this passive. And I had dungeon runs where this passive alone dealt 20% of my damage. 20% of this damage was just Curse Resonance. This passive is incredible broken. Now, of course, you will never see that in a dummy test because your teammates have to trigger this Curse Resonance. Your attacks don't count for that. But this passive seems to be a little bit buggy, and it probably has something to do if multiple people in the party use this. Sometimes you will just deal 0 damage with it, or it will only give you a 2% damage boost. It's really weird. But the potential of this ability is so incredibly strong that you have to play it. Now, for this, you will not change your passives too much. Of course, you only need that for group content. As soon as you do solo content, this passive is completely useless. What we will replace here for that is just simply Flame Condensation. Flame Condensation is a good passive, but all the other passives that we have here are just much better. Okay, enough about the passives. Now let's talk about the masteries, because here we also got some changes. The biggest change is Dark Apostasy. They added an effect on this passive here. The last sentence that you can see in this text: boost curse damage by 70%. Now this is of course incredibly strong, and you always want to play with that. There is no exception. If you are a wand player right now, you will always play with this passive. It doesn't matter what you combine your wand with. But now the question, are we playing with Malicious Intent, which gives us 50% more curse damage, or are we playing with Corrupting Hit? Because we can only have 2 passives here on the top. Now, I think Malicious Intent is right now a lot better than Corrupting Hit. There are multiple reasons for that. First of all, because they reduced our overall attack speed. And this is just because of how Dexterity works. So before the update, Dexterity would reduce our attack speed by a flat value. Now it only increases our percentage attack speed, but the attack speed is still kept at 150%. That's why just simply every class in the game just lost a lot of attack speed. It just takes longer to do all of your rotations and simply cast all your abilities. And with that, you do less auto attacks and will trigger less often Corrupting Hits. Especially on world bosses, even with deadly markers, I noticed that I have no time to do auto attacks. I'm just doing constantly abilities. And then of course the value of this ability goes down. And on top of that, when I did dummy test, This one was even winning by a small margin. The only way Corrupting Hit was winning for me if I got a lucky proc on Time for Punishment right at the start. So you would reduce the skill damage resistance from the dummy and deal way more damage. But this was really the only way how Corrupting Hit would win against Malicious Intent. So I think right now going for Malicious Intent and going for Dark Apostasy is the way to go. Other than that, nothing really has changed here in our skill tree. For our staff masteries, nothing is really changing. Everything just stays as before. Okay, now let's come to the active skills. Now here the first question is of course always, are you playing with a Dark Explosion upgrade or not? Small reminder here, the normal Curse Explosion consumes all the dots on the enemy, but will deal a lot of damage. The Dark Explosion upgrade leaves the dots on the target, but will only deal 50% of the damage. Now, before the update, both of those builds were always viable. Now, I think after the update, the Dark Explosion upgrade is just a little bit better. This has two reasons. First of all, because we don't have Corrupting Hit anymore. Now, if we consume our dots with a normal Curse Explosion, it's of course important that we get those dots on the target right away again. And for this, Corrupting Hit was really, really good. But since we are not playing with Corrupting Hit anymore, on average, it will take us much longer to apply those dots again. And then the second reason is Curse Resonance. Because as mentioned, Curse Resonance deals damage dependent on the dots that are on the target. If we consume the dots, we lose value with Curse Resonance. I did there quite a bit of testing and you really notice the difference here on your Curse Resonance damage. It seems to be just much better playing with Dark Explosion right now. Then the next question is of course always, should you play with Decaying Touch or with Corrupting Magic Circle? Now usually you only play with Corrupted Magic Circle if you are playing with Corrupting Hits, because Corrupting Hit has the possibility to apply Decaying Touch for you. So you could stack Decaying Touch and Corrupted Magic Circle. But since we are not playing with Corrupting Hit, it's just much better to play with Decaying Touch. And besides that, I made one change, and this is playing with Witching Hour instead of Ice Spear. The thing is that this ability is maybe 1 to 1.5% of your overall damage. Now, this is, of course, not a lot. And Witching Hour will be even less when it comes to the damage from the ability itself. But what Witching Hour is doing, it's increasing the duration of all your curses on your target. So, for example, if you use Decaying Touch and Touch of Despair on our target, we can just increase the duration here with Witching Hour. We bring them back to the maximum value, which is doing three things. First of all, we will deal more damage with Curse Resonance. Secondly, we will do more damage with Abyssal Burst. And third, we will deal more damage with Curse Explosion. It's not a complete game changer, but it just ups your damage a little bit. So you can either just spam that non-stop, which is totally fine. But in the best case, you always just use that right before Curse Explosion. So you simply spam Decaying Touch and Touch of Despair. But every time you get Witching Hour, you wait to use it right before you use your Curse Explosion. And you will just notice that your Curse Explosion in that moment will deal quite a bit more damage because it just refreshes all your curses like Touch of Despair, Decaying Touch, your Tavern Worn Curse, and so on. I think it's very good, especially because Ice Spear or Ice Spear Bombardment is just not dealing a lot of damage. It's just really useless. But besides that, the skills are not really changing. Okay, but that's all about the skills, passives, and masteries. Now let's hop into the gear. Oh boy, and here it becomes interesting. Let's talk first about the weapons. Now, when it comes to the cores itself from the weapons, for the wand, it doesn't matter if you play with the Heroic Staff or the Heroic Wand, you always want to go for the Tavern Wand. And since everyone will get soon a Tavern Wand for free, this is for sure the one you want to go for. For the staff, the best core is still the Aridus core. The 12% base damage increase is just incredibly strong, especially because it's also boosting your wand damage. And your wand damage is still your main damage. It's not the staff damage. We just want to amplify our wand damage as much as possible. Now, what heroic is better? Heroic Staff or Heroic Wand? Now, at the beginning, for me was clear, Heroic Wand plus Aridus is still gonna be best. It doesn't matter if our Aridus base damage is a little bit lower, simply because most of our damage anyways comes from the wand, and the stats on these two weapons are just much better than Tavern Wand plus Heroic Staff. Simply because you get so much cooldown speed, which you cannot utilize. Especially if you play with a single high focus, you waste so much cooldown speed, it feels so bad. But just yesterday night, I learned a little bit more how potential abilities work and how broken they are. So potential abilities are different stats that you can have on all of your gear. Sometimes these potential abilities just give some heavy attack damage on top, or some max mana, or then maybe they increase a skill level by 1. But then there are also some special potential abilities that can only be on weapons. Thanks to 9-bit here, who made a document with all those potential abilities. And if we look into that, we see some crazy broken shit. For example, this Touch of Despair enchant. Boosts Touch of Despair damage by 20% per stack of weakened curse. Now, Touch of Despair is one of our most important abilities for all of our curse damage. Now, being able to increase that multiple times by 20%, maybe 60, 80, 100%, is ridiculous. Or the Devotion of Emptiness enchant, where you increase the damage over time effect by 50% and reduce your skill cooldowns even more by 10%. Those two enchants are incredibly strong. Now the problem is those potential abilities cannot be inherited on tier 2 or tier 3 items. You can only inherit that on the new tier 4 items. So that means even though those effects will be super hard to get and they will be super expensive, if you want to reach that in the long run, you should go for Heroic Staff and Tavern Wand. It's just so much better because you can inherit this new Touch of Despair effect on your Tavern Wand. So yes, it not only works on tier 4 items, it also works on all Arc Boss items, even Tavern and Bellandir. Then maybe also for the Aridus, if you cannot afford the Aridus passive for now. You might be asking, what is a good alternative? The second best would probably be the Dagon's Fury. This one is not bad, but much worse, like much worse than the Ardentus passive. I would always save that Loosen here and save for Aridus, because the passive is just so much better. Of course, if you get it from a selection chest or something, sure, put it in, but don't invest 20, 30k Loosen or whatever it costs right now for this passive. And then afterwards, you would have the Delulu passive. Everything else makes not too much sense. Maybe if you have the old Dagon's Fury, you can of course also use that as a replacement. But Aridus is just absolutely best here. You want to try to get that into your build. Enough about the weapons, now let's talk about the armor. And here we have 4 different viable sets. We have the 4-piece Punisher, which gives us 50 skill damage boost and up to 40% heavy attack damage. Then we have the 4-piece Stigma set, which gives us 10% attack speed and up to 35% crit damage. Then we have the 2x2-piece Reborn. So the first 2-piece gives us 20% heavy attack damage and some PvP magic heavy attack chance, which we don't utilize, but it's still a very strong 2-piece. And then on top, the second Reborn passive will give us 20% more skill damage over time, which is of course nice because we deal so much damage with our curses. And then the last possible combination is a 2-piece Reborn, which gives us again these 20% heavy attack damage. And then we play with the old tier 3 Concord set, which gives us 12% critical damage and 14% heavy attack damage. Now let me first explain which ones we don't play. We will not play with this Stigma 4-piece. Now this one, if you can utilize the 35% crit damage, is for sure the best set. The problem on the set is that you have to stand still for 4 seconds without moving. And as soon as you move a little bit, you have to wait again 4 seconds. This is not reasonable to utilize in dungeons or on most world bosses. Most bosses will always force you to move a little bit. Now, this is, for example, not a problem with Aridus because you have this buffer of 2 seconds. So here you have to stand still for 3 seconds, but it lasts for 2 seconds, which is a nice buffer. That's why you have this passive up most of the time. But not having that buffer will heavily reduce your uptime on that. So this one is just not reasonable to use, so I would just kick that out. Then the next one we won't be playing, even though it sounds good, is the double 2-piece Reborn. So we get 20% heavy attack damage from the 2-piece on top, and then a 20% skill damage over time from the bottom 2-piece. Now the problem, as always in Throne Liberty, you have a bunch of diminishing returns. And I did some testing. Those 20% skill damage over time is actually only 10%. So if you get those 2 pieces, your curses or your dots will only deal 10% more damage. And if you then compare that with the other sets that you can get, these 10% are not worth it anymore. Because the other pieces just give you way more crit damage, way more heavy attack damage, which also increases your curse damage, but just much more. That's why I would not go for the double Reborn. That simply means we have 2 options. We go for the 4-piece Punisher, which gives us up to 40% heavy attack damage, or we go with the double Reborn plus double Concord. Now, they are both really good and both viable, and it really depends on what weapons you have, which one is actually better. You can see, for example, that in the Heroic Wand Aridus setup, I would go with the double Reborn and the double Concord set, because the stats just align a little bit better than, for example, on our Heroic Staff Wand. Here I would go for the 4-piece Punisher. One of the main reasons for that is because I want to reach around 129, 130% attack speed. because with all our food and also the Da Vinci buff from the Greatsword, we will be on 150% attack speed. Now for me, this is super important with this new update because we overall lost attack speed. I think every PvE build now has to reach those 150% cap. And the problem is if we go with the 2-piece Veiled and 2-piece Reborn, we won't be able to achieve that. And I really don't like that. The problem on the Punisher for staff players is that we get also a lot of cooldown speed through the set. So you see, even though I tried to stay as low as possible with my cooldown speed, we reached 105% cooldown speed. So that means if we would use single AoE high focus, we would waste a bunch of cooldown speed for nothing. So one of the things that you always want to do then in the late game is probably playing with target expansion. So you could, for example, take Chaining Bolt away, or if you don't need it, both of these mobility upgrades to get target expanded. Now this will give the effect also to all your teammates and will only increase your cooldown by 20%. But this is nice because we don't run too much over the cap. It doesn't feel too bad. But yeah, this is one of the big deficits here of the Punisher set, especially for staff players. But overall, you come still onto better values if you play with this set, especially if you play with heroic staff. And then the last thing we have to talk about are the accessories. As you can see, we only use one tier 4 item. All the other accessories are old accessories. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, most of the accessories will give you a bunch of cooldown speed, which we don't need. Maximum is 120% cooldown speed. And secondly, all of the new accessories don't give attack speed. If we want to reach those 129% attack speed, we have to go for a bunch of old accessories. Some of those accessories are really hard to get. Now, the Soaring Ring, for example, you will only get through doing PvP. You can either get them from the Noble Equipment Chant chest on the Honor Coin Merchant. You can every week buy 3 of those to have a chance to drop it. And on top, they can drop on the Battleground chest. If you don't want to do PvP at all, that's totally fine. Then I would suggest you to go with Ring of Forbidden Lust. Yes, it's again a tier 2 item, but it's again just better than all the other stuff that we can get in tier 4. And besides that, we have also the Tempest Brooch, which is very, very expensive. So here as an alternative, you can of course always go for the Brooch of Primacy. Okay, besides that, one of the things we haven't talked about are these skill cores. Now for skill cores, there are not a lot of options. All the staff and also the wand passes are kinda useless. There are a few interesting cores that change your sleep, but I would guess that you cannot use them against bosses. So I don't think they will be useful. So yeah, most of the stuff here is really useless for PvE for us. But there are also species damage boost enchantments. So for example, here Skilled Core, Wild King enchantment, which will increase your Wild King damage boost by 70, your Wild King bonus damage by 30, and your Wild King damage reduction by 30. Now, these ones gonna be for sure biz for PvE. If you have 2 of them from each type, that will be 140 more species damage boost, which is probably around 8-9% more damage for you, which is insanely strong. Now, of course, they will be very expensive and it will take till you get them, but this should be your goal, getting 2 of them for each monster type. Now, at the beginning, you won't have them and you can just leave the Dark Wings Bulwark in. That's totally fine. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Everything you need to know for the new update for Invocator. If you have any suggestions or other tips or something that you noticed, please feel free to share that in the comments. If it helped you, maybe consider to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.